Welcome to the NCO Journal Podcast, where we explore NCO professional development. This is a podcast series where we discuss published articles with authors and provide a forum for the open exchange of ideas, information, and solutions. I'm your host, Thiago Zapata, managing editor of the NCO Journal. Today we discuss the article, Have We Forgotten the Rehearsal? By Major George Fust and Master Sergeant Select Michael Vance. Unfortunately, they're not able to join us today. With us is Sergeant First Class Osvaldo Aquite, NCOIC of the NCO Journal, Staff Sergeant Brandon Cox, Senior Editor, Tony Mena, Senior Editor, and special guests Colonel Todd Schmidt, Director of Army University Press, and Command Sergeant Major Jason Porras, Command Sergeant Major of Army University. Before we kick things off, could you please tell us a bit about yourselves?
Sure. I'm Sergeant Major Porras. I'm the Army University Sergeant Major. Just arrived here to Fort Leavenworth. Prior to this, I was the Commandant of the NCO Academy in Alaska, and prior to that, I was the Battalion Sergeant Major for the Special Troops Battalion underneath the Sustainment Brigade and 1st Armored Division. I've been in the military for 25 years, and happy to be here.
And my name is Colonel Todd Schmidt, and similar to the Command Sergeant Major, been in the military now for 26 years. Just very privileged to have joined Army University Press, but my career started out as a young lieutenant in the 82nd Airborne Division and spent 3 to 4 years there working in 1st Brigade, Devils in Baggy Pants, and then went to Korea on the Bad Lieutenants program, and then came back to the 25th Infantry Division Light, and got me some air assault time, and then from there kind of field grade ranks, multiple deployments battered throughout. Just came from a joint job, but just privileged to be here. Thanks.
Okay, so to kick things off, today we're talking about Have We Forgotten the Rehearsal by Major George Fust and Master Sergeant Michael Vance from the 75th Ranger Regiment. Their article is about the, like I said, about the rehearsal. They focused on the history, the importance of the rehearsal, how it can be improved, and then what happens after. I've participated in rehearsals before, but not to the extent that I'm sure that some of you other gentlemen may have. Sergeant Major, would you mind kind of talking about maybe some of your experiences about the rehearsal?
Sure. So when I was a STV Sergeant Major at Fort Bliss, we had a giant clamshell hangar, and they do different rock drills there. And for their rehearsals, one of the things that they started off doing, they got and they improved upon was they'd have the maneuver rock drill, where all the maneuver elements would come in and kind of basically lay down their concept of operations and everything that they plan to do, and go very in depth. And then they'd be mission complete, and then they'd have a separate rock drill for the sustainment piece. And I've noticed that the sustainment piece and the maneuver guys were not always on the same page. And the maneuver guys felt like theirs was the most important, naturally. So the sustainment was kind of forgotten about. But we started forcing both commanders to be at both rock drills, which we'd identify gaps or shortfalls. And then we'd go through and you'd see, you can only advance so far with the fuel that the sustainment folks are able to provide to the maneuver elements. And special assets that maybe aren't in a sustainment brigade, such as, if you're crossing a bridge and they or creating a bridge, going over a water obstacle, you might need outside resources. You might have to coordinate for that. So I think to get everybody on the same page, I've seen it work really well, and I've seen it work not so well, where sometimes everything that a staff has done to plan during the rock drill, you find out it's not feasible for whatever reason, whether it's assets, personnel, or whatever goes into effect. So I think rock drills and rehearsals are extremely important, because you can have the best plan ever, but if it's not feasible due to the limitations of what you have on hand, some of that stuff falls by the wayside and you're not able to accomplish your mission. So I think the supported element and the supporting elements have to be on the same page.
Moving over to you, sir.
Yeah, so I think it's important to understand there's different levels of rehearsals based on what kind of resources you have, what kind of time you have. There's rehearsals that you just do on a map, right? You talk through, actions that are going to happen on the map, which is really a two-dimensional aspect and the simplest level of rehearsal. Then there's the rock drills, the terrain models that we would use. I mean, I remember entire gymnasiums being, taped off and the terrain kind of replicated on the gym floor. And then, if you have the resources, and particularly when you're downrange in a deployed environment, to the extent that you can do full dress rehearsals, those are obviously the most beneficial. But usually for units, particularly in garrison, it's the rock drills, the terrain models that we use. I think what rehearsals do is they bring a plan to life. They let you really understand the limitations, because when you're, as we used to say it, back in the day, we're daydreaming on acetate, which really kind of shows my age because we used to draw everything on acetate back then. But when you have a lieutenant or an officer kind of daydreaming this great plan on acetate, and then you bring it to life, what it does is allows all the components, particularly the NCOs, to bring a dose of reality to the plan. And what I would tell you is you can always tell the level of professionalism of a unit by the kind of rehearsals that they run. If they're not rehearsing, that gives you a signal, maybe a red flag. But then those units that do really good rehearsals and talk through, second and third order effects of different actions that are taking place in the terrain simultaneously, right? Because it's not all just happening, sequentially. There's all these different actions going on simultaneously. Those units that can do that and do it well, that gives you a level or an indicator of their level of professionalism and where they're kind of at in the training cycle.
One of the shortfalls, and I know the authors discuss this, is that there may be either pieces taken out or maybe some things aren't synchronized. That's one of the things that he discussed, that the authors discuss. What I've been, from the discussion that we're having here, to me, as far as the NCO perspective is concerned, I think one of the shortfalls is what the Command Sergeant Major said, which is the junior NCOs. How can they, or what can people, or what can either the senior NCOs or the officers do to involve those junior NCOs or involved in whatever mission is being planned? What can be done?
Yeah, and I'll clarify a little bit. When I say the NCOs weren't involved, they weren't involved at the higher level rock drills. And the reason I think they should be there, even if they're not an active participant, but just be able to listen and see what's going on, is you don't know what your units to your left and right are doing. Oftentimes, I think when they're conducting their company level rock drills, that's where you start to see the NCOs. So if you have a company level rock drill, it's not in as significant detail that the higher level rock drills are done. So everyone seems to focus on their piece of the pie, just what they're doing, not big picture, not knowing what everyone else is doing, where you can maximize resources, where you can consolidate or perhaps use a unit to your left or your right to extend operational reach so you can continue to do things. But I think everyone seems to focus on, on the rock drill, on the terrain model, their specific vehicle that they're in, and they're focused on that piece, and they don't really pay as much attention to everything else. And I think, like Colonel Schmidt said, the good units, they're asking questions about, when I'm executing this, what are these people doing over here to my left or to my right that are on the terrain model. So I think the good units pay attention and they ask those questions. I think if everyone understands, okay, this is my responsibility, and they only focus on that, the rock drill's kind of missing the mark.
And that's kind of what I like from the article, was that they mentioned that the point of the rehearsals is to understand the concept of operations and to understand the commander's intent, maybe be aware of key actions that are going to be happening. They're going to they're going to have decisive points in a battle or operation or things like that. So I think understanding those things and communicating is where the NCO can really shine there. Those that can make it to those higher level rehearsals, I think if they are able to understand the concept of operations, the intent, key actions, and then be able to communicate that down to their soldiers, I think is where the NCOs could improve.
So we're talking about synchronization, I think, is kind of the thread that we're pulling here. and how we're synchronizing our actions, because it's not just about the combat arm, the shooters, what they're doing, but it's also the science of the logistics that's supporting them, and how different levels of command, from the platoon all the way up to the battalion, brigade, division, because they're all doing rehearsals, right? How their part in the orchestra is being played. And I think young leaders don't always get it, because they can be nervous. They can be intimidated. You walk into a big gymnasium as a second lieutenant and you see, a battalion commander and the staff ready to do this huge rehearsal, and you're just really focused on your script. You probably even got your notes written down, and, they come, they call you, and you're like, oh, at this point in the plan, sir, my team is here and doing this, that, and the other, and they're focused on making sure that they don't screw up their script. What ends up happening, though, is they're so focused on not screwing up in the rehearsal that they're not seeing the bigger plan. And I think that comes with experience. It comes with repetition of rehearsals. And I think one of the things that the Command Sergeant Major touched on, too, is that it's not rehearsals being just done at the higher level organizations, but all the way down to the company platoon level and maybe even below, because it needs to be talked through, worked through at every level, so that soldiers understand. One of the things we're told kind of growing up is, American soldiers want to know the why. They want to know the why of the mission. They want to understand, like, all right, well, I'm out here doing all this. What else is going on around me, so I know kind of what's going on to my left and right, with adjacent units, adjacent teams, because we don't, we want to make sure we got the beans and the bullets. We want to make sure we're not committing fratricide in any kind of way. And so that's, again, goes back to the importance of rehearsals at the lowest level.
Well, present-day soldiers, specifically NCOs, are entrusted now and given way more responsibility than they used to. So I think with to expand on what you said, sir, is that, yeah, it's good that they know what's going on around them. And again, the more practice they get, the better they'll get, the better they'll be able to do, more focused and see the big picture.
If I had to add one thing, to the conversation, there's so many different important things that go on in the planning and execution of a mission. We know the importance of PCIs, PCCs, but sometimes when time is short and shortcuts have to be taken, I will tell you, if you could probably draw a line between a mistake that happens or something that falls short in a mission, it could probably be connected back to a shortcut that got taken, and that shortcut sometimes is that a unit failed to rehearse. And I just think that's important, that when time is a constrained resource, cutting out the rehearsal is not a good plan.
I've got a question from the young NCO. Let's just say a young sergeant. He's at the rehearsal. He may not understand everything that's going on, or he may just need clarification or whatever, but he's a little nervous because, like you said, sir, there's a battalion commander, there's his XO, there's all the staff is there, and all the Command Sergeant Major and everybody else, and he's just kind of hesitant to speak up. Maybe this would be more on your end, Sergeant Major, or maybe yourself, Sergeant Cox. What can a young NCO do, or what should young NCOs do to get themselves to be heard, or to get out there and throw up their hand and contribute to the planning process? Sure,
I think it's hard. It's hard to raise your hand and say, I don't understand, or I don't know, or what do you mean by X? That is something that's difficult to ask. However, that's what rehearsals are for. They're for that purpose. If you don't quite understand something, it's better not to understand it during the rehearsal than not understand it when you're executing the mission. So you got to swallow your pride, raise your hand, ask the question. I've seen that firsthand, and what a lot of people do is they ask offline after the rehearsal. And when they're asking, they're not phrasing it properly, or whoever's explaining it to them is explaining a different event or a different timeline during it, so they're not even answering the question correctly. So usually they go in a bit confused. So I'd say the best way to mitigate that is to speak up and say, you don't understand. There's nothing wrong with that. When time is an issue and you got to get through everything, it's difficult to answer each and every question. But the questions that are significant or important, they need to be asked so that you understand, because at the end of the day, we're all about, accomplishing the mission and taking care of the soldiers. And, sometimes the decisions result in soldiers not coming home. So ask the question during the rehearsal so you don't make the big mistake during the actual exercise or mission or whatever it is. I think it's important to be able to do that. And I don't think any command team would get upset with a question if someone didn't understand and needed a further explanation.
Yeah, I think the Sergeant Major's absolutely right. I think that it also comes down to maybe that soldier or that NCO not having the confidence or the experience to speak up, and maybe waiting for that right answer to come to them, from the leadership. Going back to the example you guys had about the convoy scenario, let's say I'm the TC, and I've got my truck and I got my list of soldiers that are in the truck, and they're all good, and we got our BI and everything strapped down, and we're good to go. We got our chalk and everything. But for that unknowing thing to happen, we get a flat tire, we run out of gas, we get into an accident, and now maybe I don't know what to do because we didn't think about it. We didn't rehearse it properly beforehand. I think that's really where those things can come into play, and I think that those are very important to do as well.
Right, like understanding the pace plan. You lose comms or something like that. What's the alternate comms? And I think a lot of the times those things are fairly simple. But the first time you do anything is the first time you do anything. So I think if it's your first time and you don't quite understand, you got to ask. And we're expecting a lot from our junior NCOs. I mean, you got to think at the same time while we're doing all the rehearsals and stuff like that, they are doing their PCCs, PCIs, making sure the vehicles are up to standard to accomplish the mission. So there's a lot going on while the actual rehearsals going on as well. And I imagine that's why a lot of the junior NCOs aren't at the higher level rehearsals, because they're doing other things that absolutely need to be done. So there's a lot of moving parts. It's just trying to get the right audience at the appropriate level of rehearsals and making sure that everyone understands. At the end of the day, I think understanding the commander's intent and what role you play is huge, but I think that next step of understanding what the adjacent units are doing as well, in the event that you need to take their spot or they need to replace yours, you hope that they understand what you were doing as well.
I have a little anecdote with that. So 07 Iraq, we're doing a joint mission with several Marine units. So we go out, we do our thing, we come back, we're supposed to liaison. Well, apparently this didn't happen to my platoon, because my platoon was like a mile away, but our sister platoon. So they were liaisoning with this other unit, and somehow they weren't briefed on the meetup plan or something, and it was nighttime, and that platoon, my sister platoon, went through the proper steps, and the other unit didn't understand what was happening and thought they were under attack, so they opened fire, and they weren't anywhere close. Nobody got hurt, but the potential was there for a disaster to have happened, and they talked to I think the NCO in charge later, and he wasn't briefed on anything and didn't realize what was happening, even though there were multiple units on this mission and we knew what they were doing. Somehow that unit didn't know what other units were doing. So I just think it's very important, and why I really enjoy the article, that everybody operating a mission down to even some of the lower NCOs know at least a brief overview of what's happening. Like, you will be liaisoning with a small recon team. Please don't shoot them. There are not very many of them. So yeah, I just wanted to throw that out there on the importance of rehearsals and everybody knowing the plan for mission command.
Yeah, I wanted to go ahead and tie this part of the discussion with a recently published article by Sergeant Major Nelson and Mr. Arnold, The Understated Art of Knowing When to STFU. This kind of relates right back to that, that knowing when to speak up and when to, keep your mouth shut. I think this is definitely one of those times where you want to, as a young, whether you're an NCO or an officer or a young soldier, enlisted soldier, you need to know when to speak up. And there's times, especially when you're planning a mission or working on something, and there's a question, and your piece of the pie is invested in it, you need to speak up. That's I think that's a big lesson for those young NCOs or for the NCOs listening to this, is to make sure that your people know that they need to raise their hands and talk and ask the questions rather than just letting them pass you by.
Yeah, so I'll say it's important for them to speak up. First of all, it gives them credibility that they can, restate what the commander's intent is. It gives them the confidence and credibility to their soldiers so that they understand what's going on. So if they restate it to say, make sure that they're on the same page and they acknowledge what they're supposed to be doing, they get the thumbs up from the commander and they understand, yep, that's what you're supposed to be doing. Or if they're a little bit off, they can be corrected. Nothing's scarier than like a small unit being isolated without the rest of the formation around them. So I think if you don't speak up, you may put yourself in that situation where you go beyond checkpoint X and you're out there all by yourself and nobody else is with you. You don't want a small unit to be isolated. So I think when it comes to those things, you want to make sure that you understand, and it's kind of restating what you understand your mission to be, to make sure you have it. And I think that's important.
I think the command sergeant major is exactly right. And I think there's some interesting dynamics that are a part of this. One is, when you have young soldiers who are participating, observing a rehearsal, I think it's incumbent on more experienced leaders to draw those questions out, because you will have a level of timidity, right? They're going to be a little timid in wanting to ask questions. So some things that you can look for as a leader is, one, is a person directing the rehearsal or helping facilitate the rehearsal, are they drawing the questions out? Are they helping younger soldiers or younger leaders ask the questions that need to be asked? One of the things that, I remember always being told at a rehearsal was the only stupid question is the one that goes unasked, right? And that was to encourage us to ask questions. I think an indicator of command climate is if you were to attend and observe a unit rehearsal and nobody was asking questions, that might signal a little bit of a red flag. Like, are they intimidated? What's going on? What's the dynamic here? Why aren't questions being asked? Because if I were, in a rehearsal, I want to be asking questions. I want to be engaging. And that was, something a mentor of mine told me is like, if you're watching a unit do something and there's this question and answer period, whether it's a rehearsal or a briefing or whatever it is, the unit that doesn't ask any questions, that might be an indicator of a command climate issue where people are intimidated to speak out. Just something that leaders can pick up over time. Command Sergeant Major alluded to, being a small unit, potentially getting isolated. One of our Army's most tragic examples of a small unit who got isolated and overrun was the 507th Maintenance Company in Iraq. And folks will remember it because of, Private Jessica Lynch. And, at the time, the Chief of Staff of the Army, General Peter Scootmaker, said no more Jessica Lynches. And that's why he instituted and, really reinforced the warrior ethos that he wanted all soldiers to really kind of take to heart. But the point of me bringing that up is, the 507th Maintenance Company, they fell behind. They got separated as a small unit. In the rehearsals, they didn't know how to whether it was the catch up or how to get back on track on the map. Whatever the host of things that went wrong, and it's not to go down a rabbit hole on the 507th, but it's just doing rehearsals helps prevent, hopefully, those sorts of tragic instances when you're thrown into a combat situation and you throw in all the human elements, right? Because when you're planning and you're writing the plan, you're rehearsing the plan, and you're well fed, and maybe you're getting some rest, but now you're in the heat of battle and you're exhausted, and it's hot, and you're tired, and you've been going, for over 24 hours, and you're not getting any sleep. The rehearsal is hopefully inoculates a little bit against some of the things that can go wrong, because they know because of their rehearsal, what they should be doing, where they should be, how to stay in contact, all those little things that can work out, all those little details that help bring the plan to reality.
So I'll say the big takeaway is the Army has a lot of processes in place because they work. Rehearsals are there because they work. They're value added. You get a lot out of it. So I would say if there's a process that the Army has implemented and it's something we're supposed to be doing, it should not be an optional requirement. It's mandatory. You should do it. You shouldn't shortcut it. You should most definitely do it because in the end, it saves lives. So I would say rehearsals can't be skipped. It's part of a process, large process in planning. And I'd argue that it's one of the most important steps in the planning process because it's where everybody seems to get on the same page. Questions are asked, questions are answered, and the commander's intent is visualized by the people at the rock drill, and they understand. So the big takeaway is don't shortcut it. It exists for a reason, and use rehearsals prior to executing.
Gentlemen, thank you all for being here. And thank you to our audience. Remember to put your knowledge to the page, submit articles, and get published with the NCO Journal. Don't forget to check out our webpage and follow us on social media. Catch you next time on the NCO Journal Podcast.